Her son watched her fall, then smiled and turned back to his coffee. Gloria Ramsey, 73 and twice widowed, didn't break. By nightfall, a lease would land on his table, legally binding, signature required. In 30 days, he'd be out. No tantrum, no loophole, no mercy. He thought age meant surrender. She made sure the stairs remembered otherwise. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning had started like most others, quiet, gray, and cold enough to make the windows weep. Gloria Ramsey, wrapped in her threadbare cardigan and worn house shoes, balanced a laundry basket against her hip as she stepped into the shared stairwell of the converted brownstone. The wooden steps, once polished and proud, now creaked with every shift of weight. Age had settled into them the way it had settled into her joints, subtle but unforgiving. As she climbed, the soft fabric inside the basket swayed slightly with her motion. She paused on the second landing to catch her breath, her other hand gripping the banister worn smooth by decades of touch. The light overhead flickered faintly, casting long shadows that wavered with each tremor in the bulb. Outside, a storm 2 nights ago had left a veneer of ice on every exposed surface, and while the city had salted the sidewalks, no one had thought to tend to the inside stairwell. Certainly not Eric. She shifted her weight forward again, moving toward the next step when her foot met a slick patch of invisible frost. In a blink, her balance tipped backward. The basket flew from her hands, landing with a thud that sent towels and socks scattering like startled birds. Her body followed, her back slamming against the wooden edge, her elbow catching the railing with a bone-deep crack, and her head narrowly missing the wall. By the time she stopped sliding, she was splayed across the first-floor landing, stunned, the silence in the hallway now pierced only by the slow ticking of the thermostat in her apartment behind the door. Upstairs, the sound of movement stirred. Behind the frosted glass of the second-floor window, Eric's shadow appeared. A moment later, Marla joined him. They didn't rush down. They didn't call out. Instead, Gloria caught a glimpse of Marla's mouth moving, her face lit with amusement. The words floated through the thin air with cruel clarity. "We should get her a walker with chains," Marla said, her voice dry with mockery and barely muffled by the window pane. Gloria didn't move. Not at first. The sting in her elbow pulsed with each heartbeat, and her hip ached from the impact. But what hurt most was the hollow throb of humiliation that settled just beneath her ribs. "Grandma!" A voice called from the top of the stairs. "Tasha!" Gloria looked up to see her granddaughter rushing down, hoodie half-zipped, phone in one hand, concern etched deep across her young face. She moved fast, too fast, and Gloria's pride kicked in before her granddaughter could get close. "I'm fine," she said, her voice clipped, firm, and laced with an edge that surprised even her. Tasha stopped 2 steps above her. "You don't look fine. You hit your side. Your arm, should I call?" "I said I'm fine." The second time was colder. Sharp, she gathered what she could from the mess, ignoring the sock that had landed in a dust-cloaked corner. Every movement sent pain flaring up her side, but she forced her face to stay neutral, her breath slow. She didn't want help. Not from anyone who pitied her, and certainly not while her son and his wife watched like spectators. She turned, limped back to her unit, and closed the door softly behind her. Inside, the heat hissed from the radiators, but it did little to ease the chill that had settled in her skin. She dropped the basket by the couch, eased herself into the nearest chair, and peeled up her sleeve to examine the swelling already blooming on her forearm. A bruise the size of a teacup, purpling fast. She moved gingerly, reaching into the freezer for a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel. Pressing it to her elbow, she closed her eyes. The buzzer startled her 10 minutes later. She opened the door to find Lenora standing there, bundled in a thick coat, a grocery bag in one arm, and the kind of expression that could burn holes through brick. "I brought soup," Lenora said, pushing past her without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes dropped to the limp in Gloria's step, then to the fresh scrape on her temple and the laundry trail still scattered near the hallway. Her jaw tightened. What happened? Gloria didn't answer. She didn't have to. Lenora followed her gaze to the ceiling, where the footsteps of Eric and Marla creaked faintly above. Then she looked back down and set the soup on the table with slow precision. "I hope they enjoyed the view," she said, her voice low but smoldering. "It's about to change." Still silent, Gloria moved to the oak hutch near the back wall, where the old drawers stuck slightly from years of moisture and age. She pulled the bottom one open, reached inside and lifted out a zippered binder, its plastic cover yellowed at the edges. Dust puffed up as she unzipped it. Inside lay the deeds, the diagrams and the legal documents her late husband had filed with methodical care decades ago. Ownership records, property lines, lease drafts never signed. She placed the binder on the kitchen table and opened it. Each page felt like a match waiting to be struck. The next morning, the bruise on Gloria's arm had ripened into a deep plum color. It throbbed when she reached for her coat, but she didn't wince. She simply noted the pain, folded it neatly into her silence, and locked the door behind her. Downtown Pittsburgh was still waking up when she arrived at Deeks & Fowler LLP. The building wasn't impressive, just another weather-worn brick rectangle tucked between a shuttered deli and a cell phone store. But inside, it smelled like old carpet and long memory. The receptionist recognized her with a warm nod and motioned her toward the back. Mr. Deeks hadn't changed much. His hair had gone whiter at the temples, and his glasses had thickened since she last saw him in person. But his voice still had the calm, pointed rhythm of someone who had long ago learned to fight with paper instead of fists. "Gloria Ramsey," he said, standing as she entered. "That's a name I don't hear nearly enough." She gave a small smile, but didn't sit until he gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. It gave a slight squeak as she lowered herself carefully into it. "I brought the binder." She laid it on the desk, its zipper still half open. Deeks adjusted his glasses and flipped through the first few sheets slowly, nodding to himself with each turn. "Original deed, title transfer, full chain of ownership, all intact. You've kept it in better shape than most banks would," he said. "And more importantly, your name's still the only one that ever mattered." Gloria didn't speak right away. She simply nodded, one hand resting on the edge of his desk. The weight in her bones wasn't from age anymore. It was from clarity. "I want a tenant audit," she said finally. "I want records, payment history, lease agreements, anything they signed or didn't." Deeks raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He opened a drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began jotting notes in his clean, looping script. "We'll subpoena utility records and run a full payment ledger through the building department. Shouldn't take more than a week. They've never paid rent," Gloria said. It wasn't speculation. It was something closer to fact than accusation. "They said family doesn't charge family." Deeks's pen paused. He looked up. "Then maybe it's time they finally signed something." For the first time. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The energy in the room shifted, slowly, precisely, like the first click of a ratchet strap, pulling tight. By noon she was back at the brownstone. Tasha sat curled on the living room floor, earbuds in, her math textbook open but clearly neglected. She looked up when Gloria walked in, carrying a plain cardboard box from the hardware store. "Need help?" Tasha asked, already rising. "Not with this," Gloria said gently. Inside the box were 3 compact black security cameras, each no larger than a closed fist. She laid them out on the table, unpacking the mounting brackets and screws, her movements careful and methodical. Tasha hovered for a moment, clearly curious. "You putting those outside?" "No," Gloria said. "Just the stairwell." Her tone didn't invite further question. Tasha nodded and sat back down, but her eyes lingered as her grandmother pulled on her coat again and headed for the shared hallway. That afternoon, Gloria installed each camera herself, one facing the base landing, one at the midpoint, and one angled toward the upper unit's door. She drilled into the wood with the slow precision of someone threading a needle, ignoring the ache in her shoulder as the drill buzzed. Each wire was tucked neatly against the molding, each camera synced to a separate drive in her bedroom closet. Later that evening, she stood at the kitchen table again, addressing a large envelope to herself. Inside, She placed a printed set of time-stamped photographs, ice at the stairwell, the angle of the fall, the camera feeds, the timestamps, a sealed self-mailer, evidence, certified, dated, indisputable. She handed it to the mail carrier the next morning without fanfare, without explanation. Tasha noticed. She didn't ask questions, but something in her eyes said she understood more than she let on. The girl hovered in the hallway that night, lingering by the doorway as Gloria pulled another manila folder from the hutch and began sorting through names and notes. Her hands moved slow and steady, like someone counting pieces before building something permanent. Gloria didn't look up. Yes, baby. You ever think about leaving this place? I mean, just walking away. Gloria paused for a second, then returned to her papers. I think about a lot of things, she said softly, but I don't walk away from what I built. Tasha watched her for a long moment before backing into the hallway again, leaving her grandmother alone with the documents in silence. The lease sat in a navy blue folder on the kitchen table, its weight somehow heavier than the paper inside. Gloria had printed 3 copies. The font was clean. The terms were precise. Every clause had been double-checked by Deeks, who had said with quiet satisfaction, "There's nothing aggressive here, just finally legal." Outside, a steady hush of snow blanketed the stoop, softening the brownstone's tired creaks. Inside, it was anything but quiet. "I'm sorry, what the hell is this?" Eric asked, holding the folder at arm's length like it smelled of rot. He stood by the radiator, his parka unzipped, cheeks still flushed from the cold. "A lease? You're actually handing me a lease?" Gloria didn't respond immediately. She sat across from him with a cup of black coffee, one hand wrapped around the mug, the other resting calmly on the table. Her eyes didn't waver. "It's a formality," she said, her voice even. "A record for what's been informal too long." Marla had taken a seat but was already leaning back, arms crossed. Her smile was thin, brittle. "We'll have to run this past a real lawyer," she said, glancing at Eric for backup. "I mean, you can't just throw a lease on us after all these years." "You can," Gloria said, finally setting her cup down. "And I did." Eric let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You're joking, right? What are we, your tenants now?" Gloria tilted her head just slightly, the movement small but deliberate. You just never signed the paper to admit it." Marla picked up the folder again, flipping through it with performative disinterest. Month-to-month rent, shared maintenance terms, stairwell liability clause. This is ridiculous. It's like something off a free website. I had it written by someone who's been doing this longer than either of you have been alive. Marla scoffed. "We'll see what our lawyer says." Gloria leaned back in her chair. "He'll say what the last one told me. I own everything you're standing on." The silence that followed was taut, clipped by the hum of the old refrigerator cycling back on. From the hallway, Tasha lingered near the doorframe, half hidden in her oversized hoodie. She'd heard most of it. She always did. When Eric and Marla finally left, folder in hand, muttering to each other as their boots crunched down the walk, Tasha stepped into the kitchen, her face unreadable. Gloria was already putting the second copy of the lease into a manila envelope. "Do I sign one?" Tasha asked quietly, stepping closer. Gloria hesitated. "You don't have to. You're a minor." "I know," Tasha said, "but I want to." Gloria looked at her for a long second, long enough to search for sincerity and find only clarity in her granddaughter's gaze. Without a word, she turned the folder around and handed Tasha a pen. The girl signed her name with careful precision, then slid the paper back toward her grandmother. "It's not about rent," she said, almost as an afterthought. "It's about respect." Gloria didn't say anything, but her eyes softened in the way only a grandmother's could, quietly, deeply, without needing to explain. That evening, she took all 3 signed copies to the notary's office, 2 blocks away. The woman behind the desk had inked 1,000 signatures, but when Gloria slid the documents forward, the woman paused. "Family lease?" she asked, glancing over the names. "Family listen," Gloria replied. By the time she returned home, snow had thickened into the gutters. The light from the second-floor unit was on, flickering behind warped curtains. As Gloria stepped into her apartment, The warmth greeted her like memory. Lenora was waiting in the armchair, knitting needles clacking idly, scarf halfway grown in her lap. "Well?" she asked without looking up. They signed. Lenora smirked. "You ready for the noise that's coming?" "I fell once," Gloria said, locking the door behind her. Never again. The inspector arrived on a Monday morning with no warning, no knock, and no hurry. His city-issued windbreaker was zipped up to the neck, clipboard in hand, boots soaked from sidewalk slush. Gloria watched him from behind her curtain, steam rising from her mug as he studied the exterior steps, then moved inside toward the shared stairwell. By the time she opened the front door, he was already halfway up the interior flight, shining a small flashlight at the warped wood panels and slick landings. "Ma'am," he said without looking at her, "are you the property owner?" "Yes," Gloria replied evenly. "I am." He jotted something down. "Complaint filed last week about stair safety, ice accumulation, structural wear. I'm here to document current conditions and file a hazard report with building compliance." Gloria said nothing. She simply stepped aside so he could finish. Upstairs, the heavy stomp of Eric's boots sounded down the steps. His voice followed before he was even in view. "Hey, what's going on? Who called this in?" The inspector ignored him. Gloria didn't. "City's doing a safety check," she said, tone dry. "Guess they take winter injuries seriously these days." Eric's eyes narrowed, flicking between the inspector and Gloria. "Seriously," he said with a forced laugh, "it's not like anyone's actually been hurt." The inspector raised a brow. "That's not what the report said." Eric went quiet, but Gloria caught the muscle twitching in his jaw. He didn't like being left out of a loop, especially not one wrapped in authority. "I'd recommend adding salt more regularly," Gloria said, her face calm as still water. "Prevention's cheaper than surgery." She turned and walked back into her unit without waiting for his reply. 2 days later, Deeks emailed her the paperwork confirming the stairwell's reclassification. Under an obscure but valid municipal insurance clause, Gloria's unit was now legally responsible for primary access to the shared staircase. It shifted the liability, the coverage, and quietly the power. She printed the document, folded it neatly, and slid it into the binder. Then she got to work. The next morning, she rolled up her sleeves and swept the lower landing clean. She patched a cracked board with fresh oak and sealed it with a matte finish. Then came a short strip of orange caution tape across the bottom 2 steps. Not enough to block access entirely, but enough to signal that this was her domain again. Eric came storming down not long after. "What the hell is this?" he barked, yanking the tape aside as if it were a personal insult. "You think you can just block the damn stairs?" Gloria, kneeling with a bucket of wood filler and a putty knife, looked up slowly. "I'm repairing them," she said plainly. "For who? Your fan club? No one uses this half but us." She stood carefully, wiping her hands on a rag. "Then maybe you should have fixed them." He stared at her, nostrils flaring, words caught somewhere between disbelief and rage. But she didn't blink. He turned and stomped back up the stairs, muttering something about lawsuits and crazy. That evening, Tasha appeared in the hallway, clutching her phone, her hair pulled into a loose braid. "Grandma," she said softly, watching the fresh stain dry on the newly patched stair tread. "What if they fall now?" Gloria didn't look up. She pressed the last nail into place with a rubber mallet. "Then we'll be even," she said. The light above them flickered again. No one moved to fix it. Later, after Tasha had gone upstairs, Gloria stood in the hallway alone. The repaired stairs gleamed faintly in the low light, solid and silent. Her back ached, her hands throbbed from the cold, but her footing had never felt steadier. She turned to the wall, where an old framed photo of the house from the 70s still hung crooked. She straightened it. It was the for sale sign that caught her eye, half buried in a crust of snow, tilting slightly like it hadn't been planted with conviction. Gloria noticed it on a Sunday morning while brushing rock salt off the front steps. The wind had knocked the corner loose and she bent to fix it, her gaze drifting upward to the vacant brownstone next door. 3 stories, identical bones to hers, shuttered windows, paint flaking in streaks near the eave. It had sat mostly empty for years, passed through investor hands like a hot potato, always talked about but never truly touched. But now it was back on the market. Gloria straightened slowly, the shovel still in her hand. She let her eyes follow the alley between the houses, the narrow side path that wrapped behind both buildings. The layout came back to her: two staircases, both units upstairs, both built decades before zoning had teeth, and one easement between them, unassuming, legal, quiet. She stood there longer than she meant to, until the cold worked its way up her sleeves and her fingers stiffened. By Monday she was sitting across from Deeks again. "You're serious," he said, flipping the listing page she'd brought him. "You want to buy this?" "I want to own what touches mine," Gloria said. Deeks studied her for a beat, then gave a small nod. "We'd have to move quick. It's a foreclosure holding. No mortgage seller, just the title bank and a fire sale price." "I have the money," she said simply. "Where?" Gloria opened her leather purse and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside was a printed balance sheet, her late husband Thomas's mutual fund, untouched since the year he died. She'd left it alone all this time, letting it collect dust and dividends in equal measure. "Are you sure?" Deeks asked, eyes scanning the numbers. "I don't need monthly growth," she said. "I need leverage." He didn't argue. By Friday, the deed was being finalized. She kept it quiet. No agents, no lawn signs, no bank appraisals, just cash. A clean title and a lawyer who had known her long enough not to ask too many questions. Upstairs, Eric and Marla remained oblivious. At least until Sunday morning, when Marla spotted the missing for sale sign through the window. "We should have bought that," she said, nudging Eric as they passed Gloria's open stairwell door on their way out. "Would have made a killer Airbnb." Eric gave a short laugh. "We could have knocked out the back wall, added a connecting patio, hell, maybe even turned both places into a duplex and just managed the whole thing." Marla grinned. "Imagine the control." Gloria, standing just inside her door, let them pass without a word. By Tuesday she owned both. Deeks filed the purchase under a quiet LLC, the name a subtle nod to Thomas's old Navy call sign. She didn't need anyone tracing it, at least not yet. More importantly, he filed a new right-of-way restriction that reclassified the shared back easement. From now on, all legal access to the upper unit's back stairwell ran through Gloria's property. One signature shifted everything. That evening, as snow began to fall in thin diagonal sheets, Gloria stood at the edge of the newly purchased backyard. The chain-link fence between the buildings was rusted through in places, like no one had cared for it in decades. She placed her hand on the metal and looked up at the rear staircase of the unit her son now occupied. It clung to the siding like an afterthought, its frame crooked with weather and time. Tasha came up behind her quietly. She'd been trailing Gloria more lately, not asking questions, not offering help, just watching, learning. "You bought it?" Tasha asked, eyes wide. Gloria didn't look away. "Not for them." "For us?" the girl asked. Gloria's voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "For the stairs." A moment passed, then another. From the upstairs window, the curtain shifted. The gate arrived in 3 separate boxes: steel, hardware, and control panel, all delivered quietly and without comment on a Tuesday morning, left by the stoop like any other parcel. Gloria signed for them, with a pen that didn't tremble, and carried each one inside herself, piece by piece, careful not to scratch the molding as she navigated the narrow hallway. By nightfall the pieces had taken shape. The barricade rose like something out of a blueprint only she had memorized, a matte black gate at the base of the shared staircase, set in steel posts drilled into the old concrete. It didn't rattle, it didn't creak, it stood still, heavy with finality. The lock mechanism was digital, code only, programmable from the inside. No keyhole, no override. From her living room window, Gloria could just make out the keypad blinking red in the dusk. At 7 the next morning, Eric tried to push through. She heard the clang from the kitchen, metal on metal, then a string of muffled curses. She didn't move. A minute later came the unmistakable sound of something scraping. She glanced outside and saw Eric crouched at the gate with a hacksaw in one hand, a coil of orange extension cord trailing behind him. He was halfway through shouting at the gate when Mrs. Pullman from next door came out to her porch in a fleece robe and house slippers. She stood there watching, holding her morning coffee like a prop, before calmly pulling out her phone. By the time the squad car arrived, Gloria had already started her second load of laundry. Two officers spoke to Eric at the sidewalk, both of them with the posture of men who had been down this exact road before. Gloria didn't open her door. She didn't have to. The gate stood behind them like punctuation at the end of a long misunderstood sentence. Later that afternoon, Marla made her move. Standing on the top landing behind the bars of the newly installed gate, she held her phone out at arm's length, streaming live. Her voice quivered on cue. "This is what elder abuse looks like," she said into the lens. "My mother-in-law, if you can even call her that, has locked us out of our own home in the dead of winter. We don't have access to basic safety. Fire exits, freedom of movement. She's weaponizing property against family." Gloria stood behind her screen door, arms folded, watching Marla's dramatics unfold like a play meant for an audience that never really showed up. Tasha appeared beside her quietly, arms crossed over her hoodie. "Is she serious?" the girl asked. Gloria didn't answer. She simply opened the screen door, stepped outside, and stood at the bottom of the staircase, hands in her coat pockets. Expression flat. "You're welcome," she said clearly, "to build your own staircase." Marla lowered the phone. That night, the video floated online for a few hours before fading under a pile of unrelated outrage. The comments were mixed, but the tone was clear. Gloria hadn't trapped anyone. She had locked a gate on her own property, and the footage of Eric wielding a saw didn't help Marla's case. By the weekend, Gloria had installed a motion-activated light over the gate and posted a laminated notice: "Access requires authorization, leaseholders only." Tasha started sleeping downstairs more often, not in defiance of her parents, but in silent solidarity. She claimed it was for school, or the quiet, or the better Wi-Fi. But Gloria knew it was something else. Something older. One evening, while Tasha typed an essay at the kitchen table, Gloria opened a new notebook and began writing the rent ledger by hand. Every date, every missed payment, every passive-aggressive note. She documented each one like a historian archiving something the world had ignored too long. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "Tenant, Eric Ramsey. Unit, Upper 2B. Amount due, 0. Then rewrote, "Amount due, too late to pretend it's nothing." She smiled to herself, a quiet thing, then turned the page and started again, this time with numbers, interest, and dates. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and polish, old wood, new toner, and the kind of tension that thickened the longer you waited to be called. Gloria sat at the petitioner's table in a navy blue blazer she hadn't worn in years. It still fit. Deeks sat beside her, flipping calmly through a slim accordion file. Everything he needed had been arranged in order: lease copies, time-stamped photos, notarized payment requests, stairwell footage, and the original deed in triplicate. Across the aisle, Eric adjusted his tie for the 5th time. It hung unevenly, too long on one side. He muttered something to Marla, who sat cross-legged in heels too high for comfort, phone tucked under her thigh like a weapon waiting for the right moment. They didn't acknowledge Gloria, but they didn't look away either. When the clerk called the case, Ramsey vs. Ramsey et al., Gloria rose slowly. She didn't need help. She didn't need drama, just gravity and clarity. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, salt and pepper hair coiled into a tight bun, glasses low on her nose, patience even lower. She scanned both tables with professional detachment. "We're here on a motion to enforce lease terms and pursue formal eviction, correct?" Deeks stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We're filing on grounds of non-payment, repeated violation of terms, harassment, and breach of occupancy agreement." Eric laughed, a dry scoff that echoed too loudly. "This is a family matter. It shouldn't even be in court." The judge didn't look up. "Then perhaps it should have been resolved before it required my time." Marla leaned forward, palms splayed. "We've been trying to work with her. This is just her way of punishing us. because she doesn't like how we run the house. The judge held up a hand. Let's see the documentation. Deeks clicked open the file and began sliding exhibits across the table one at a time. Gloria watched, steady and silent, as the pile grew, printouts of every unpaid month, photos of the locked gate, screenshots of Marla's live stream, a notarized lease with 3 signatures, and camera footage with date stamps of the day. Gloria fell. Across the room, Marla shifted in her seat. Eric crossed his arms and leaned back, the heel of his shoe tapping steadily against the linoleum tile. The judge flipped through the documents for several long minutes. Then she turned to Gloria. Do you have a statement, Mrs. Ramsey? Gloria stood, her palms resting gently on the edge of the table. She didn't bring out the speech Deeks had offered to prepare. She didn't clear her throat or ask for time. They laughed while I fell, she said plainly. I rebuilt everything under their feet. The judge blinked, just once. Then she looked down at the exhibits again. There were no more interruptions. After a pause that stretched just long enough to settle like a closing curtain, the judge picked up her pen. Eviction approved. 30 days notice. Motion for financial damages and recovery of rent will be scheduled in a separate hearing. Eric shot up. This is insane. She's manipulating this whole thing. She's senile. She has clearer documentation than either of you, the judge said without raising her voice, and considerably more grace. A bailiff approached to usher them out. Marla whispered something sharp behind her hand, but Eric had gone silent, blinking hard, like he hadn't quite calculated the ending would look like this. Outside the courthouse, the cold hit harder than expected. Gloria pulled on her gloves, took a breath, and let it sit. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Tasha, I'm so sorry, Gloria typed back with gloved fingers. Gloria, not your fault. Not anymore. She didn't look up when she hit send. She didn't need to. The sheriff's knock came early. 8:12 a.m., sharp, precise, like the punctuation at the end of a sentence. No one else wanted to write. Gloria opened the door without hesitation, dressed in a slate gray sweater and pressed slacks, the collar of her blouse peeking just above the neckline. She looked exactly as she should, calm, prepared, and unmovable. Mrs. Ramsey, the deputy said, offering a nod. We're here to serve official notice for eviction. Ramsey. Eric and Marla, unit upstairs. Gloria stepped aside, motioning toward the staircase. Top floor, mail slot on the right. She didn't follow. She stood just inside her unit, arms crossed, as the officers climbed the stairs with solemn purpose. The sounds were brief, firm knocks, a rustle of paper, the curt delivery of a legal command, and then silence, the kind that doesn't fade so much as sink. Moments later, the front door burst open. Eric's boots struck the floor like hammer blows. His voice carried before he did. You think this is over? He bellowed, coming down the stairs 2 at a time. You think some piece of paper makes you queen of the block? He didn't stop at the bottom landing. He stormed straight through the hall and into the corner of Gloria's unit, an entry vestibule they'd once shared like family. His fist connected with the drywall just beside the coat hooks, cracking the paint in a starburst. Plaster dust rained down on the doormat. Gloria didn't flinch. You break what you don't own, she said flatly. That's always been your style. Eric turned, face flushed, knuckles bleeding, eyes wide with something wild rage, confusion, maybe even shame, but he didn't speak. Not to her. Lenora stepped forward from the kitchen, silent until now. She held a cordless phone in one hand and looked at Eric like he was a roach she'd already stepped on. Police are on the way, she said. Might want to start practicing your apology. He hesitated, then turned and slammed out the front door without a word. Gloria waited until she heard his boots stomp up the stairs again before moving to the damaged wall. Her fingers traced the cracked paint. She didn't sigh, didn't curse. Instead, she took a photo with her phone, opened a small filing app, and saved it under a folder labeled simply Damages. By the time the officers returned to take the report, she'd already placed a new security order online. Upgraded surveillance cameras, reinforced locks on both front and back entryways, and a glass break sensor for the shared foyer. You expecting more trouble? The officer asked. Gloria didn't answer. She just handed over the photo. That evening, Lenora unpacked a small suitcase in Gloria's guest room. It had been decades since the two sisters had lived under the same roof, but the rhythms returned quickly. Shared tea, split newsprint, one old episode of Perry Mason on the television before bed. Just in case, Lenora said as she slid a pillow into a floral-patterned case. Gloria nodded. That's all the planning we ever really needed. The brownstone settled into a strange hush. Upstairs, it was too quiet, the silence of people waiting to explode or retreat. Downstairs, the warmth of the radiator hummed like a lullaby. Tasha didn't come by that evening, but Gloria wasn't surprised. It was too soon. Until the note arrived, she found it the next morning, tucked under the seam of her front door, folded once, no envelope, handwriting small and even. Grandma, I'm tired of picking sides. I just want peace. Can I stay with you? Tasha. Gloria read it 3 times before setting it down on the kitchen table beside the tea kettle. She didn't move to answer right away. She simply stood in the hallway watching the new lock's green light blink once, then fade. The sound came first. A sharp yelp, short, surprised, just loud enough to cut through the rustle of morning wind. Then the distinct thud of flesh on concrete, followed by a silence that almost sounded embarrassed. Gloria turned her head slightly at the noise, peering through the edge of the lace curtain above her kitchen sink. Her Ring app was already pinging. She opened it calmly. The camera footage played back in real time. Marla, dressed in a sleek coat and heels she'd never learned how to walk in, was pacing down the icy concrete step of the adjacent brownstone, the one Gloria now owned outright. A phone pressed to her ear, hand gesturing wildly, her voice sharp and too loud, even without the sound on. One misplaced heel, a patch of barely visible black ice near the edge of the bottom stair, and then she was airborne. The fall was almost cinematic, arms flailing, the phone flying from her hand, her left leg folding awkwardly beneath her. She hit the pavement in a heap, coat flared out like a crumpled bird. Gloria didn't smile, not once, but someone else did. The video, captured automatically and uploaded by the Ring system to Gloria's cloud account, was forwarded that afternoon to her own email as part of the routine weekly digest. But that night, it appeared again on someone else's feed. Tasha's friend group, then the local subreddits, then a neighborhood Facebook group. Someone added a caption in white block text, "When karma hits on concrete." By noon the next day, the video had over 25,000 views. Marla limped up the steps in front of a local urgent care with a knee brace and sunglasses, too large for her face. She refused to speak on camera when a freelance reporter caught her coming out. Eric, in damage control mode, filed an insurance claim through Gloria's building policy. It was denied within hours. The claim adjuster cited the deed transfer and the fact that the rear stairwell where the fall had occurred was part of the newly purchased parcel, owned independently, not covered under Eric or Marla's lease. Gloria had ensured that detail was baked into the paperwork with Deeks, legal, binding, unshakable. Eric called twice that day. Gloria didn't answer. Instead, she logged onto the local property registry portal and did something she hadn't done since Thomas passed. She made a public post of deed transfer. No announcement, no self-congratulatory caption, just a scanned, notarized document showing her name under both addresses. It made the rounds quietly at first. A few real estate hobbyists, a housing rights group, a handful of older tenants Gloria didn't even know personally, began sharing it with one-word comments like, "Queen, owned, stairs never lie." That evening, Tasha returned from school and set her bag down softly on the bench beside the front door. Her eyes were serious, voice almost reverent. "I saw it," she said. Gloria glanced up from the couch, where she'd been reading a small booklet on zoning updates. "Saw what?" "The video. The fall. Everyone's passing it around. Kids I don't even talk to know who she is now. People are calling her entitled. And you." She hesitated. "They're calling you a legend." Gloria folded the booklet closed, set it aside on the end table. "Did you laugh?" Tasha shook her head. "No." Gloria nodded once. Good. Tasha looked down, hesitated. You didn't either. I watched your face when you saw it. You didn't laugh. No. Gloria said quietly. I've already had my fall. The living room felt still after that, thick with a kind of mutual knowing. Tasha sat beside her grandmother, not close enough to touch, but close enough to anchor. Outside, the neighborhood lights were beginning to come on, one porch at a time. Gloria stood and walked to the front window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the sidewalk, the edge of the staircase, the spot where Marla had gone down. Then her eyes moved up. Eric stood at the top of the upper unit steps, phone in hand, but not filming this time. Watch. The moving truck pulled up at 9:03 a.m. It was too clean, too large, too optimistic for what it had come to carry. Gloria noticed it before she even touched the kettle. From her kitchen window, she watched the sheriff step out of a cruiser, clipboard tucked under one arm, the insignia on his jacket catching a glint of low winter sun. He knocked once, loud and official, then waited. Upstairs, no one opened the door immediately. Inside, Gloria poured water over a mesh bag of chamomile, the steam curling upward into the quiet. She didn't dress for the occasion. Gray cardigan, slippers, hair pinned back loosely, but her posture was straighter than usual as she carried her mug back to the window. At 9:12, Eric finally opened the door. He looked older than he had a week ago, not in the face, but in the shoulders. He muttered something to the officer, too quiet to hear, but the sheriff didn't respond. He simply handed over a copy of the court order and stepped aside. Then came the boxes. Marla descended first, carrying what looked like a tangled pile of coats and unopened mail. Her limp was mostly gone, but the brace remained, more performative than functional. Behind her, Eric shuffled down with a suitcase that squeaked with a broken wheel. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't glance toward Gloria's window, but Gloria saw them anyway. She watched them move in and out for the better part of an hour. Tenants in name only, finally uprooted by the terms they once refused to acknowledge. A folding chair, a cracked mirror, a bundle of cords, no photographs, no framed memories, just pieces. When the front door closed for the last time, the stillness returned like a tide that had finally receded. Gloria exhaled into the mug, long and slow, then walked over to the file cabinet in the hallway and pulled out a new folder Deeks had prepared. Ramsey v. Ramsey. Civil recovery. Inside, repair estimates, copies of unpaid utility bills, security footage timestamps, evidence of holes punched in plaster, scratched hardwood, a flooded tub left running just enough to stain the ceiling tiles below. Gloria made her notes in the margin, precise and unhurried. That evening, Tasha came downstairs with a duffel bag and a school-issued laptop. She didn't say anything at first, just lingered by the door until Gloria looked up from the ledger she'd been updating. Rooms already made, Gloria said. Tasha smiled faintly and stepped inside. Later, after they'd eaten in comfortable silence and the dishwasher hummed faintly in the background, Gloria handed Tasha a folded sheet of paper. The girl opened it and scanned the contents. Simple terms, just like before. Month to month. No rent for now. One clause about shared chores, another about mutual respect. You sure? Tasha asked softly, almost afraid to believe it. Gloria nodded. This isn't inheritance. It's protection. Tasha signed without hesitating. Gloria did too. That night, as wind pushed softly against the old windows, Gloria walked through the upper hallway alone. The unit was empty now, stripped down to its bone. She passed the nail holes in the walls, the spot where Marla once hung a fake wreath for Christmas, the faint scuff marks of a recliner that was never meant to fit. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small brass key, and slid it into the lock on the unit's door. One turn, one click, it was hers again, and not just on paper. As she descended the stairs, her eyes caught a detail she hadn't noticed before. A small crack near the baseboard, hidden beneath old paint, hairline, but present. She knelt slowly and ran her fingers over it, then stood and made a quiet mental note. Tomorrow she'd fix it. It was tucked inside a shoebox behind the boiler, unlabeled, water-stained and almost overlooked during the post-move-out cleaning. Gloria had found it by accident. She'd gone upstairs with a flashlight and gloves, looking for the source of a slight rattling in the heat vent. Instead, she found the box wedged into a crawlspace cabinet behind the closet door. It was light when she pulled it out. Inside, an expired bottle of over-the-counter sleeping pills, a hotel pen, and a faux leather notebook, with Marla's initials stamped faintly into the lower corner. The pages smelled like mildew and sharp perfume. Gloria stood there for a long moment before opening it. The handwriting was unmistakably Marla's, tight cursive, heavy pressure on every downward stroke, as if the pen was always one comment away from tearing the paper. At first it was mundane, grocery lists, schedules, occasional lines of frustrated venting about Eric's inability to grow up. Then the entries changed. Dates aligned with moments Gloria hadn't thought to question. Words shifted from complaint to strategy. If she forgets again, I'm documenting it. Maybe it's time to switch her meds around. Just one mix-up. Nothing major. What if she falls again? That'll help. Gloria sat on the floor and read every line. Her face didn't change. Her pulse did. By the end of the notebook, she felt more cold than fury. It wasn't a scream on the page. It was something worse. A quiet dismantling of her autonomy, planned one lie at a time. Later that afternoon, she carried the journal in a sealed manila envelope to Deeks's office. She didn't sit down when she arrived. He opened it, read a few lines, and immediately closed the cover. Jesus, he murmured, shaking his head. This is poison wrapped in paper. Lock it up, Gloria said. But don't bury it. I want it somewhere it matters. Deeks nodded solemnly and slid the envelope into his secure file drawer, then tapped twice on the edge of the cabinet as if sealing it in. Back home, the air felt heavier. Tasha was gone for the afternoon debate club, she'd said, and Lenora had returned to her own house for the week. The brownstone creaked under the late winter sun, old beams shifting like joints, finding new alignment. Gloria walked to her closet and pulled out a shoebox of her own. Inside were 6 journals of her own, years of quiet memory, inked carefully in the late hours after Thomas died. Some pages were full of mundane ritual. Others carried the weight of grief, exhaustion, and hope, too raw to have ever been spoken aloud. She flipped through one, ran her thumb across a paragraph, written the day Eric first moved back in. It feels like sharing space with an echo of someone I used to raise. He's here, but I don't know what version anymore. She didn't read the rest. Instead, she gathered the journals in a shallow metal tray, walked out to the back of the brownstone, and set them on the concrete step between both houses. A breeze tugged at the edges as she struck the match. One by one, the pages curled inward, ink liquefying under flame, smoke curled into the gray sky. No one rewrites my history, she whispered. When the fire was out, she returned inside, boots dusted with ash, smelling faintly of closure. Tasha came home just before dinner. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, a little out of breath, backpack hanging by one strap. She dropped it by the bench, kicked off her shoes, and walked into the kitchen. I was thinking, she said, reaching into the fridge for a bottle of water. About after graduation. Gloria looked up from the counter, where she'd been folding a dish towel. I want to be a paralegal. Maybe even a lawyer. You think Deeks would let me shadow him for a summer or something? Gloria blinked slowly. You sure? Tasha nodded. I want to help people take back what's theirs. Like you did. Gloria felt the quiet bloom behind her ribs, pride not flashy or loud, but rooted and wide. She smiled. We'll ask him. The reporter had soft eyes and a notepad that never stopped moving. She sat across from Gloria at the kitchen table, voice low and curious, tapping her pen once every time she paused between questions. This isn't just a story about eviction, she said, glancing up. It's about legacy, late life agency, taking back what people try to make invisible. Gloria stirred her tea but didn't drink it. It's about stairs, she replied. The reporter smiled. I think it's about more than that. Gloria didn't answer. She let the silence hold. The article ran 2 weeks later in the Pittsburgh City View, under the headline, The Woman Who Took Back the Stairs. It featured a photo of Gloria standing at the base of the brownstone's interior staircase, hand resting lightly on the banister, head held level, not high, not low. Her cardigan was neat. Her eyes looked directly into the camera. The piece recounted her quiet legal maneuvering, her handling of difficult tenants, her refusal to be moved out of her own home by those who called her both mother and burden. It spoke of the deed transfer, the reclassification, the security upgrades, but mostly it spoke of endurance. Mrs. Gloria Ramsay didn't fight back with volume, the article read. She fought back with paper, patience, and an iron will. The day the article came out, Gloria didn't tell anyone, but people found her anyway. At the neighborhood cafe, the barista gave her a coffee on the house. The young mother in line behind her whispered, "You're her, right?" and squeezed Gloria's elbow before hurrying off. And Jean, the cafe owner, came out from behind the counter for the first time in a year. "I knew that was you," he said with a warm, rough smile. "I saw the picture. Took me a second, but yep, still you." Gloria tilted her head slightly, amused. "Still me." Jean scratched the back of his neck. "You, ever think about dinner?" "No strings. Just talking. I make a decent pot roast." She studied him, familiar in the way old places become comforting, a gentle man with worn shoes and a shy streak. Years ago she might have said yes. "I'm still building," she said gently. "But thank you." Jean nodded without offense. Good foundations take time. When she got home, Lenora was already waiting on the staircase with a wrapped bundle under her arm. She waved the paper in the air before Gloria even reached the step. "You thought you could sneak a whole article past me," Lenora grinned. "I went down to the print shop and made it nice." She held up the frame, a simple black border, matted in cream, the headline at the top, the photo beneath, crisp, quietly proud. Gloria laughed under her breath. "You didn't." "I did," Lenora said. "And I'm hanging it right here." She tapped the wall at the base of the stairs, the exact spot where Gloria once lay bruised, where years of tension had pooled without notice. The frame went up with 2 nails and a level. "There," Lenora said. "Let them see who owns the climb." Later that week, Tasha started her first day volunteering at Deke's office. She wore a button-down shirt slightly too big and carried a leather-bound notebook with color-coded tabs. "She's sharper than I was at 20, Deeks admitted to Gloria over the phone. "I'm not surprised, but I'm still impressed." Gloria didn't say much, just smiled quietly into the receiver. That evening, Tasha came home flushed with excitement. "He let me sit in on a consultation," she said, kicking off her shoes by the door. "Did you know most tenants don't even realize when their lease is invalid? It's like their rights are invisible until someone shows them where to look." Gloria nodded. "It's always been that way." Tasha leaned against the counter. "Not anymore." Outside, the street was beginning to darken. Porch lights blinked on across the block. Somewhere down the road, a wind chime danced in the breeze. Gloria stepped to the window and pulled the curtain back. Not to check, not to guard, but simply to see. The envelope arrived mid-morning, slid through the front slot without a knock. Gloria bent slowly to pick it up. The return address was stamped in all caps, Allegheny County Clerk of Courts, and the weight of it was just light enough to make her suspicious. Inside, a copy of Eric's petition to reverse the eviction, filed pro se, language full of venom disguised as principle, unlawful familial manipulation. One line read, "Senior coercion under the guise of tenancy. Petitioner demands immediate reinstatement of leasehold occupancy." No lawyer listed. No legal standing, no prayer of success. Still, Gloria sat down at the kitchen table and read every line front and back. She didn't shake. She didn't scoff. She folded the document precisely in thirds and slid it into a new file marked frivolous motions, Ramsay. Then she called Deeks. He laughed once, short and dry, before she even finished reading the header. "This won't reach the courthouse steps," he said. "I'll file a Rule 11 sanction before he even finds parking." 2 days later, the pre-trial hearing lasted 11 minutes. Deeks presented a binder labeled Eviction Compliance and Judicial History. The judge didn't even open it before leaning back and sighing. This is the same unit, same parties, same outcome already ruled on, she asked, adjusting her glasses. Yes, Your Honor, Deeks replied. He's filing for reversal with no legal basis. No current lease. No recognized right of return, just regret dressed up as grievance. Eric tried to interrupt. She manipulated the whole system. She turned my daughter against me. The judge raised one eyebrow. Your daughter is legally an adult. Your tenancy is legally void, and your argument is legally nonsense. Eric blinked. Deeks didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. The gavel tapped once. Petition dismissed. Miss Ramsey is fined for abuse of process. $1,200 payable within 30 days. Mrs. Ramsey's legal fees are approved for reimbursement. Back at the brownstone, Gloria stood at the base of the staircase with a small box under her arm. Inside, a fresh roll of carpet runner, steel-backed grip tape, and a stapler heavy enough to anchor a storm. The stairs had been sanded the day before, each step smooth now, edges beveled, the wood no longer warped from years of boots that never respected them. Tasha met her halfway up, carrying a small toolkit she'd borrowed from Deeks. Ready? She asked. Always, Gloria said. Together they worked in quiet tandem, measuring, trimming, securing. The staple gun echoed in the hall like affirmation. Every snap felt like punctuation, not just repaired, but claimed. When they reached the top, Gloria leaned against the railing and looked down, not with fear, not with memory, but with certainty. No one's laughed here since, Tasha said softly, gazing at the tread where her grandmother once fell. Gloria glanced at her. And no one will. The two stood there in the golden late afternoon light, the carpet catching it like a held breath. Then Gloria reached into her pocket and handed Tasha a slim white envelope. Inside, a notarized document, transferring partial title of the lower unit joint ownership, conditional, clear terms, signed and sealed. Tasha blinked. Is this real? It is now, Gloria said. Tasha swallowed hard, voice thin. Why me? Gloria's reply was simple. Because you never needed to steal your way in to belong. They stood in silence for a moment longer, just the creak of the building settling beneath them. Downstairs, Lenora's radio hummed faintly with old jazz. Outside, wind pressed against the eaves, but nothing inside shifted. Not anymore. It was a quiet Sunday when Gloria wrote the letter. Rain tapped gently against the brownstone's front windows, just enough to blur the world outside, soft enough to invite reflection. She brewed a pot of coffee, half-calf now, at her age, and sat at the dining table with a fresh sheet of linen stationery and her favorite black pen, the one Thomas had once wrapped in brown paper with a crooked bow, calling it executive-level nonsense. At the top of the page, in her neat, deliberate hand, she wrote the title, The Fall Was Necessary. The letter was not long. She didn't catalog the lawsuits or the insults or even the bruises. She wrote instead about thresholds, how some were crossed in anger, others in survival, and some only in surrender. She described what it meant to live in a body that no longer moved like it used to, in a house that no longer obeyed memory, with a family that mistook endurance for silence. I fell, yes, she wrote. The pen steady, but not down. I fell into clarity. She folded the letter once, then again, and slipped it into a small waterproof envelope. Tasha's name was written on the front, along with the date. Later that afternoon, Gloria knelt beside the first landing of the staircase, newly carpeted, faintly lemon-scented from last week's cleaning, and pulled loose the vent panel beneath the lowest step. Inside, she placed the envelope in a small silver tin, along with a photo of herself and Tasha from last fall, and a flash drive Deeks had helped her load with scanned documents, leases, footage, and the original notarized transfer. Not just memory, proof. She screwed the panel back into place with a cordless driver, then sat on the step and waited for the ache in her knees to fade. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to fund new banisters for 7 low-income homes and 2 wheelchair-accessible ramps for brownstones like hers. Deeks helped her deliver it. He didn't ask for a press release. Some falls, she told the program director quietly, aren't accidents. They're warnings. That evening, Patricia hosted a dinner in Gloria's honor. Nothing extravagant, just good roast chicken, cloth napkins, and enough wine to loosen the retelling of every meaningful moment without drifting into false nostalgia. "You're a legend now," Patricia said as she refilled her glass. "It's like you lit the damn staircase and left breadcrumbs for the rest of us." Gloria smiled but shook her head. "All I did was stop handing out matches to people who like to watch me burn." Laughter followed, not loud, not cruel, the kind that heals something. Back home, Gloria found Lenora folding blankets on the couch. They hadn't spoken much that week, not out of distance, but the kind of quiet that follows a long good storm. Gloria reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a heavy envelope. Inside, a certified deed copy, notarized again for redundancy, one of only 3 in circulation. "For safekeeping," Gloria said, holding it out. Lenora raised an eyebrow. "Insurance policy?" "No," Gloria said. "Legacy." Her sister accepted the envelope with both hands, then tapped it against her palm like testing its truth. She looked down the length of the hallway, then up toward the top of the staircase. "You fell up," Lenora said simply. Gloria didn't answer, she just smiled, then turned toward the kitchen, her steps measured and unhurried. The wind that morning was sharp, the kind that carried flags taut and made voices cut cleaner. Gloria stood on the top step of the Allegheny County Courthouse, the mic adjusted to her height, the podium flanked by city officials, and folding chairs packed tight across the plaza below. She wore a long navy coat, no brooch, no hat, her hair pulled back in a single low twist. There was a hush in the crowd, not reverent, not silent, but expectant. Behind her, banners marked the city's new Safe Steps initiative, funded in part by her donation, matched twice over after the article and the video made their rounds. But that wasn't why they were here. She cleared her throat softly. The crowd quieted. "I don't have a speech," she began, voice steady, amplified just enough to reach the furthest edge of the courthouse steps. "I've had enough of people putting words in my mouth." There were light chuckles, but they faded quickly. "They laughed when I fell," Gloria said. "That sound, it built everything that came next. Every form, every filing, every lock, every nail. I didn't do any of it to win. I did it to stop disappearing." She paused, let her breath settle. Somewhere in the front row, Tasha was holding her phone upright, camera rolling. "You get to a certain age, and people assume you'll lower your voice, that you'll trade clarity for comfort. But that fall," Gloria looked down at the wide concrete stairs below her. "That fall reminded me whose footing mattered." Applause rose, polite at first, then strong. Not out of obligation, but recognition. Tasha didn't lower her phone until the crowd stood. Tasha uploaded it, with only one caption. "My grandma didn't fall." She rose. Within hours, the clip had thousands of shares. Community pages, housing rights networks, even a law school account reposted it, with the comment, "We'll be assigning this one." The footage showed none of the old drama, just a woman in her 70s, standing still, speaking truth without ornament, and that, it turned out, was louder than any performance.